Dr. Vivian Croft had spent 5 years becoming the world's leading expert on vampire ethics and ancient bloodlines. Her reputation at the Silver Dawn Academy depended on tonight's presentation at the annual gala, where she would unveil research that could change human-vampire relations forever. Instead, she found her fiancé Julian with his fangs buried in her research partner Serafina's neck, behind the display of ancient vampire artifacts worth more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. The silver stake in Vivian's hand suddenly felt like a weapon. Serafina, 26, and perpetually jealous of Vivian's success, had her fingers tangled in Julian's hair, the same way Vivian had touched him that morning when he'd promised this gala would launch their joint research institute. The engagement ring on Vivian's finger burned like an accusation. "Ah, you absolute bastard!" Her voice came out steady, colder than the champagne she'd been about to toast with the Vampire Council representatives. Julian jerked back. Serafina's blood smeared across his mouth like evidence. Serafina didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She just smiled. That venomous smile she'd perfected since they'd started working together. "Viv, this isn't what it looks like," Julian started, which was possibly the stupidest thing he could have said, given that his hand was still on Serafina's waist and her puncture wounds were still bleeding. The champagne glass in Vivian's hand shattered. She hadn't meant to crush it, but her hands had moved on instinct, and now champagne and blood from her palm were mixing together, dripping onto the marble floor. The sound drew attention from nearby guests. She could feel eyes turning toward them, could hear the whispers starting to spread through the crowd like wildfire. "How long?" Vivian demanded, her academic training keeping her voice measured even as her world crumbled. "How long have you been feeding from my research partner?" Serafina laughed. Actually laughed. "Since your engagement party, darling. He proposed to you at noon and was drinking from me by midnight. You were always too busy with your vampire obsession to notice what you were losing." The words hit harder than any physical blow. 6 months. They'd been planning a wedding for 6 months while he'd been feeding from her own research partner, sharing the intimate bond that feeding created between vampires and their chosen donors. The gala's string quartet seemed obscenely cheerful, playing something classical while Vivian's life imploded between the ancient grimoires and the priceless vampire relics. Julian reached for her, and she stepped back so fast she collided with something solid. Cold hands caught her shoulders, steadying her, and she caught the scent of something ancient, night-blooming jasmine and old leather and something metallic, like blood and silver mixed together. "Careful!" A voice rumbled above her head, dark and smooth like aged whiskey. "That champagne is from my private reserve. Would be a shame to waste it on trash." Vivian turned and found herself staring at a chest in a perfectly tailored black suit that looked like it cost more than her annual salary. She tilted her head back and met eyes so dark they were almost black, set in a face that could have been carved from marble. Severe cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, and an aura of power that made the air around him feel heavy. He looked like he'd walked out of a Renaissance painting and into an Armani campaign, except no painting could capture the predatory grace in the way he moved or the ancient danger in his eyes. The man was looking at Julian and Serafina with the kind of disdain usually reserved for something stuck to your shoe. Around them, the crowd had gone strangely quiet. People were backing away, giving them space like this stranger was radioactive. Vivian noticed that even the vampire attendees, normally arrogant and fearless, had gone pale. "Who the hell are you?" Julian demanded, trying to reclaim some authority. But his voice cracked on the last word. "Someone who appreciates fine research more than you appreciate fine women." Apparently. The stranger's hand was still on Vivian's shoulder, cold through the silk of her dress. "This academy belongs to people I have treaties with. I don't tolerate mediocre vampires making scenes at quality events." There was something in the way he said treaties that made Julian go pale. Around them, Vivian noticed figures in dark clothing positioning themselves at exits. Not obviously, but deliberately, the kind of security that didn't need to show weapons because they were the weapons. "Our Lord Alaric Volkov," someone whispered nearby, and the name rippled through the crowd like a curse. Vivian knew that name. Everyone in her world knew that name. He was the vampire lord who controlled the underground network of ancient bloodlines, forbidden knowledge, and artifacts that museums would kill for. The Vampire Council had been trying to bring him to heel for centuries, and she'd just backed into him like a clumsy teenager. The champagne was making everything fuzzy, or maybe it was shock, but suddenly, Viviane had the worst, most brilliant idea of her entire life. She turned in Alaric's grip, looking up at this dangerous vampire with his ancient eyes and his predator's grace. "I need a favor," she heard herself say, her words slightly slurred. She'd been stress drinking all evening, sampling the champagne like a fool. "Can you bite me? I want to make him jealous." The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Lord Alaric Volkov's eyebrows rose fractionally, the only sign of surprise on his otherwise impassive face. Up close, she could see flecks of silver in those dark eyes, could see the way his jaw tightened as he studied her face. "You're drunk," he observed, not unkindly. "I'm devastated," Viviane corrected, swaying slightly. "But also drunk, yes. 3 glasses of champagne and half a bottle of wine because the council representative cancelled. Please. I just caught my fiancé with my research partner and I refuse to be the pathetic one at my own presentation." She could feel Julian staring, could feel Serafina's shock radiating across the space between them. The whole gala had stopped pretending not to watch. They were the center of a scandal that would fuel gossip for months. Alaric's hand moved from her shoulder to cup her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. His skin was cold, but not unpleasantly so, like marble that had been kept in the shade. "Do you have any idea who I am?" His voice was low enough that only she could hear, intimate as a secret. "A vampire who appreciates fine research," Viviane quoted back at him, reckless with heartbreak and champagne. "And apparently someone everyone's terrified of, which makes you perfect for making my cheating bastard of an ex-fiancé lose his mind." Something flickered in those dark eyes. Amusement, maybe. Or interest. His thumb traced her lower lip, and Viviane's breath caught despite everything. Up close he smelled like expensive cologne, and something darker. Blood, perhaps. Old blood, the kind that came from centuries of feeding. "This is a terrible idea," Alaric murmured. "All my best ideas are terrible," Viviane whispered back. When his mouth touched hers, the entire world disappeared. The kiss started as performance. Viviane was certain of that. Lord Alaric Volkov was simply doing a drunk woman a favor, giving her a moment of dignity in front of her cheating fiancé. But somewhere between the first touch of his lips and the second breath, it stopped being theater and became something else entirely. His mouth was cold and tasted like the expensive champagne she'd served earlier, complex and perfect, and something darker underneath. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss, and Viviane forgot that they had an audience, forgot that she'd only asked for a simple bite, forgot everything except the way his other hand had moved to her waist, pulling her closer against that expensive suit. She made a sound, something embarrassingly desperate, and felt him smile against her mouth. Then his fangs grazed her lower lip, gentle but possessive, not breaking skin but promising he could. And Viviane's knees actually buckled. He caught her, of course, shifting his weight to support her as if women fainted into his arms every day, which, given who he was, they probably did. When he finally pulled back, Viviane's lipstick was ruined and her carefully pinned hair had come loose. Alaric looked completely unaffected, except for a slight darkness in his eyes and the faint trace of her lipstick on his mouth. He wiped it away with his thumb, never breaking eye contact. "Better?" he asked quietly, and his voice had gone rougher, like gravel wrapped in velvet. Viviane couldn't speak. She nodded, her fingers still clutched in his lapels. Behind her, she heard Serafina's outraged gasp, heard Julian saying something that might have been her name. The string quartet had stopped playing entirely. "Good." Alaric's hand was still in her hair, possessive and cold. "Now smile at them like you've won." She did. turning in his arms to face Julian and Serafina with what she hoped was devastating confidence, despite the fact that she was fairly certain her legs weren't working properly. Julian looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Serafina's face had gone an ugly shade of red. "The engagement's off," Vivian announced, her voice carrying across the silent gala. "Obviously, Serafina, you can have him. He's clearly more your speed." She twisted the engagement ring off her finger and threw it at Julian's chest. It bounced off his lapel and skittered across the marble floor, the diamond catching the light like a falling star. "I'm upgrading." The crowd erupted in whispers. Vivian felt Alaric's chest shake with silent laughter against her back. "Viv, you don't know what you're doing," Marcus started, but one look from Alaric shut him up instantly. "I think Dr. Croft knows exactly what she's doing," Alaric said, and there was steel under the silk of his voice. "And I think you should leave, both of you, before I have you removed," less politely. The figures in dark clothing materialized closer, and suddenly it wasn't a suggestion anymore. Julian grabbed Serafina's arm and they retreated through the crowd, which parted for them like they were diseased. Vivian watched them go and felt nothing but champagne-fuzzy satisfaction. "That was insane," she breathed, still leaning against Alaric because standing on her own seemed ambitious. "I just threw away my engagement at my own presentation and kissed a vampire lord in front of 300 witnesses. Technically, you kissed me," Alaric corrected, amusement coloring his tone. "I was simply accommodating. You grazed my lip with your fangs. You moaned." Vivian's face flamed. Around them, the gala was slowly returning to life, conversations resuming in hushed, excited tones. She'd given them the scandal of the season. Tomorrow, her name would be in every academic journal and gossip column from New York to London. "I should probably—" She gestured vaguely at the room, at her responsibilities as the keynote researcher, at the life she'd just spectacularly imploded. "I have a presentation to give, council members to schmooze, a reputation to salvage." "Your reputation just became significantly more interesting," Alaric observed. He released her slowly, like he was making sure she wouldn't fall over. "The ethicist who kissed Lord Alaric Volkov and lived to tell about it. You'll be infamous by morning." "Is that supposed to comfort me?" "It's supposed to prepare you." He straightened his tie, which had apparently rumpled without him noticing. "Oh, they'll ask questions about me, about us, about what this means. What will you tell them?" Vivian hadn't thought that far ahead. The champagne was wearing off, replaced by the cold reality of what she'd just done. She'd kissed a vampire lord the council called untouchable, a collector of forbidden knowledge and black market artifacts. She'd done it in public, in front of everyone who mattered in her field. "The truth," she decided, lifting her chin. "That you helped me when I needed it. That my fiancé is a cheating bastard who doesn't deserve the research partnership I was going to give him at our institute." Alaric studied her for a long moment, something calculating in his expression. "You have excellent taste in vampire lore," he said finally. "The research you presented last year on ancient feeding rituals, the distinction between consensual bonds and forced thralls. Brilliant work. You read my research? I've been alive for 800 years, Dr. Croft. I was there for some of those feeding rituals. Your accuracy was impressive." Vivian's academic brain immediately started firing questions, but Alaric pulled a card from his pocket before she could speak. Matty black with silver embossing. A phone number, nothing else. "Have dinner with me tomorrow night. I have a collection of artifacts I've been saving for someone who would actually appreciate them. Original texts from the Blood Wars, a feeding chalice from the Court of Shadows. Things that would make your research legendary." "That's—" Vivian's mind raced with the implications. "Those artifacts are supposed to be lost, destroyed. The council has been searching for them for centuries. The council looks in the wrong places." Alaric leaned in, his breath cold against her ear. 8 p.m. "I'll send a car." Vivian took the card, her fingers brushing his. They were cold, but she'd expected that. What she hadn't expected was the slight tremor in her own hand. "This is insane." "You've said that already." Alaric pulled back and Vivian saw the truth in his eyes. He knew she'd come. Knew she was already hooked, Not on him necessarily, but on the promise of knowledge, of artifacts that could revolutionize her field. "One dinner," she heard herself say. "To thank you for tonight." Of course. His smile said he knew she was lying to herself. Just dinner. He left then, his security melting away with him, leaving Viviane alone in the center of the gala with a black card in her hand and the taste of him still on her lips. Around her, the whispers crescendoed. She'd just agreed to have dinner with the most dangerous vampire on the East Coast. Viviane woke up on her couch at noon with a headache like an ice pick through her skull and 17 missed calls from her mother. The champagne had been a mistake. The kiss had been a bigger mistake. Agreeing to dinner with Lord Alaric Volkov might have been her worst decision yet, which was saying something considering she'd gotten engaged to a man who'd been feeding from her research partner. Her apartment looked like a crime scene. Her gala dress was puddled on the floor. Her shoes kicked off in 2 different directions. The black card sat on her coffee table, accusatory and tempting. She'd looked Alaric up at 3 a.m, sleepless and spiraling. The search results had been terrifying. Council investigations spanning centuries, suspected trafficking of forbidden artifacts, a gallery in Soho that was definitely a front for something illegal. He'd been photographed at vampire courts with ancient lords and ladies, always in the background, always watching. One article called him the gentleman collector. Another called him the most dangerous vampire in the modern world. And she'd asked him to bite her. Begged him, actually, in front of 300 witnesses. Her phone rang again. Her mother. Viviane answered it with the resignation of someone facing execution. "Viviane Marie Croft, what in God's name were you thinking?" Her mother's voice could have stripped paint. "You're on every vampire news site. There are photos of you kissing that ancient lord, and your father is having heart palpitations." "Julian was cheating on me with Serafina," Viviane said flatly, pressing her palm against her forehead. "At my own presentation, I found them together." Silence. Then, "Serafina. Your research partner, Serafina. Unless I have another research partner I don't know about." Viviane stumbled to her kitchen, desperate for coffee. "For 6 months, Mom. Since the engagement party." More silence, longer this time. Her mother's anger shifted, refocused. "That little bitch. I knew she was jealous. But this. And Julian. I introduced you to him. His family has the Hunter's compound in Connecticut. Had the compound. I'm fairly certain after last night. No one in the academic world will touch him." Viviane found her espresso machine, started it with shaking hands. "About that," her mother's voice went careful. "Viviane, that vampire is dangerous. Whatever you think last night was, it wasn't worth getting involved with someone like him. He offered me access to artifacts from the Blood Wars, original texts, Mom, things that could complete my research on consensual feeding bonds versus forced thralls. If he has them, he stole them," her mother said sharply. "Viviane, listen to me. That kiss was lovely revenge, truly, but that's where this needs to end. Cancel dinner. Block his number." Forget this ever happened. But Viviane was already thinking about those artifacts, about the way Alaric had known her research, about his hands in her hair, and the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious. "I have to go," she told her mother. "I need to fix the disaster from last night." She hung up before her mother could argue and stared at her reflection in the dark screen of her phone. Her hair was a mess. Her makeup was smudged. She looked like she'd been through a war. But she also looked alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. The rest of the day was a nightmare of damage control. Her department head called, surprisingly supportive. The scandal had apparently tripled interest in her research. Her colleagues called, half concerned, half fascinated. Everyone wanted to know about Alaric, about the kiss, about what happened next. Serafina sent 1 text, "You'll regret this." Julian sent 12, ranging from apologetic to angry to threatening. Viviane blocked him after the 6th one mentioned lawyers. At 7:30 that evening, she stood in front of her closet trying to decide what one wore to dinner with an ancient vampire lord. Something that said, "I'm not intimidated by your alleged artifact trafficking, but also, I appreciate forbidden knowledge." She settled on a black dress, simple and elegant, with her grandmother's silver cross. If she was going to hell, she might as well look classic doing it. The car arrived at exactly 8. Not a limo, thankfully, but a Mercedes that screamed money without being ostentatious. The driver was polite and silent, and they drove to a building in Tribeca that looked like every other converted warehouse on the block. Except this one had a private elevator that required a key card and what looked like a blood scanner. Vivian's heart hammered as they ascended. This was insane. She was having dinner with a vampire who probably had people killed for sport. A vampire who'd kissed her like he wanted to devour her in front of everyone she knew. A vampire who understood her research the way she did, with reverence and obsession. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse that took her breath away. But before we continue with what Vivian found in that penthouse, if you're enjoying this story of revenge, forbidden romance, and ancient vampires, please hit that like button. It helps more people discover this channel. And subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because trust me, this story is about to get even more intense. Now, back to Vivian stepping into Lord Alaric Volkov's domain. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, the lights of Manhattan spread out like diamonds. The furniture was minimal but exquisite. Modern pieces mixed with what looked like actual medieval artifacts. And the art on the walls, that's a Caravaggio, Vivian breathed, staring at a painting she'd only ever seen in textbooks. That's been missing since World War II. Allegedly, Alaric's voice came from behind her. I prefer to think of it as relocated to someone who appreciates it. She turned and found him in dark slacks and a black shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, less formal than last night, but somehow more dangerous. He had 2 wine glasses in each hand, both empty. You came, he said, and there was satisfaction in his voice. You have a stolen Caravaggio on your wall, Vivian replied. Of course I came. I'm clearly making terrible decisions this week. He smiled, that slow, dangerous smile. The artifacts are in the study. But first, I need to know. Are you here because you want to be, or because you're still angry at your ex? Both. Vivian moved closer, drawn despite her better judgment. Maybe neither. Maybe I just wanted to see if that kiss was as good as I remembered. Or if it was the champagne. Only one way to find out. Alaric set down the glasses and reached for her, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. This kiss was different, slower, more deliberate. Without an audience, without the performance aspect, it felt intimate and dangerous. His mouth was cold and tasted like wine, and when his fangs grazed her lip again, Vivian let herself sink into it. Let herself forget that this was probably the worst idea she'd ever had. When they broke apart, she was breathing hard, and his eyes had gone darker, more silver than black. Better than I remembered, she admitted. Good. He picked up the wine glasses again. Now come see something that will ruin you for all other research. The study was dominated by floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books and artifacts that shouldn't exist. Original manuscripts in languages that predated modern civilization, feeding chalices made of materials she couldn't identify. And in the center, in a climate-controlled case, a leather-bound tome that made her heart stop. Is that... Vivian couldn't finish the sentence. The Codex Sanguinis, Alaric confirmed. The original text on vampire-human bonds, written by the first vampire lords in the 10th century. Every other copy was destroyed during the purge. Vivian's hands were shaking as she approached the case. This was the holy grail of her research. Scholars had been searching for this text for 1,000 years. How did you... I was there when it was written, Alaric said simply. I helped write parts of it, actually. The sections on consensual feeding bonds versus forced thralls. Your research last year was remarkably accurate, considering you were working from fragments and second-hand accounts. He opened the case with a key that hung on a chain around his neck. You can touch it, carefully. Vivian's academic brain was screaming. This was impossible. This was everything she'd ever wanted. This was also probably incredibly illegal. She reached out with trembling hands and touched the ancient leather. The book was cool under her fingers, the pages inside visible through the open cover. Text in Old Norse, Latin, and languages she didn't recognize. I could spend years studying this, she whispered. I know. Alaric was watching her with that intense focus. That's why I'm offering you access to my entire collection, everything I've gathered over 8 centuries, all the forbidden knowledge the Council tried to destroy. Vivian looked up at him sharply. Why? What do you want in return? Dinner, he said. Conversation. Someone who understands what these artifacts mean beyond their monetary value. Someone who sees them as history, as art, as knowledge worth preserving. You're a collector. I'm a vampire who's lived long enough to see too much knowledge destroyed by fear and politics. Alaric moved closer. Garand your research on ethical feeding practices, on the difference between consensual bonds and forced thralls. It matters. It could change how humans and vampires interact. But you need primary sources. You need the truth, not the sanitized version the Council allows. And you'll just give me access, out of the goodness of your heart. I don't have a heart, Alaric said. It stopped beating in 1224, but I have standards, and I'd rather see this knowledge in the hands of someone brilliant than locked away in council vaults, where no one can learn from it. They had dinner in a room dominated by windows and a table set for 2. The food was exquisite, prepared by a chef who apparently catered to Alaric's specific tastes. Vivian barely tasted it. She was too busy asking questions about the artifacts, about the blood wars, about feeding practices in medieval vampire courts. Alaric answered everything with the patience of someone who had centuries to spare. He told her about the politics of ancient vampire society, about the treaties that had been made and broken, about the knowledge that had been lost to time and fear. Why focus on artifacts and knowledge? Vivian asked, emboldened by the wine. With everything you could do, why this? Because they're beautiful, Alaric said simply. Because most vampires see humans as food or toys. But some humans like you, create things worth preserving, research that matters, knowledge that could change the world. I'd rather protect that than destroy it. Even if you stole it, I prefer to think I'm keeping it from people who don't deserve it. He refilled her glass. Like your ex-fiancé, I did some research on Julian. His family's hunter compound trains mediocre vampire hunters who rely on brute force instead of understanding. He doesn't appreciate research. He just wants to profit from it. And you're different. I'm exactly the same, Alaric admitted. Except I have better taste and fewer scruples about where I source my collection. They finished the wine, and then he showed her more artifacts. A feeding chalice from the Court of Shadows, original letters between vampire lords during the Blood Wars, manuscripts that detailed feeding rituals she'd only read about in fragments. Vivian was tipsy again, but in a warm, golden way that made everything feel possible. Alaric told her about growing up in medieval Europe, about learning to navigate vampire politics, about the first time he'd seen a human create something so beautiful it made him want to preserve it instead of destroy it. She told him about studying vampire ethics, about the first time she'd realized that the official histories were sanitized lies, about her dream of creating a research institute that told the truth about vampire-human relations. Somewhere around midnight, they ended up on his couch, her shoes kicked off, his jacket discarded. They were debating the ethics of forced thralls versus consensual bonds, their faces close, their words tangling together. You're going to be trouble, Alaric murmured, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. I can tell already. You kiss me in front of everyone I know, Vivian pointed out. I think the trouble started there. No, he said, his thumb brushing her lower lip. The trouble started when you looked at me like I was your salvation instead of your damnation. When you understood the research the way I do, that's when I knew I was in trouble. One dinner, Vivian whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. That's what I said. One dinner, Alaric agreed, but we both know you're lying. When he kissed her this time, it wasn't for show or revenge or curiosity. It was because they both wanted it. This dangerous thing growing between them. And when he pulled her into his lap, when his hands slid into her hair and she made that desperate sound again, Vivian knew she was already lost. She'd come here for artifacts and found something infinitely more intoxicating. Vivian woke up in sheets that cost more than her monthly rent, in a bedroom with another stolen masterpiece on the wall. This one looked like a Monet, Morning light filtered through blackout curtains, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then she felt the cold weight of Alaric's arm across her waist, and memory came flooding back. The artifacts, the conversation, the way he'd carried her to his bedroom sometime around 3 a.m., both of them too far gone on wine and chemistry to pretend they weren't going to end up exactly here. "You're thinking too loud," Alaric murmured against her shoulder, his voice rough with sleep. "I can hear your panic from here." "I slept with an ancient vampire lord," Vivian said to the ceiling. 24 hours after catching my fiancé with my research partner, I had sex with a vampire who probably has people killed for a living. Allegedly, his arm tightened around her, and technically, you didn't sleep with me. We're still in bed. No sleeping has occurred. Despite everything, Vivian laughed. She turned in his arms and found him watching her with those dark eyes. His hair was mussed, making him look younger, less dangerous, though she knew that was an illusion. "I should go," she said, not moving. "I have work, a life, a reputation that's already in tatters." "Your reputation is fine," Alaric replied, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her back. "Better than fine. You're now the woman who made Lord Alaric Volkov interested enough to publicly claim. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Should I be flattered or terrified?" "Both." He kissed her forehead, gentle in a way that shouldn't have worked on an ancient vampire. "Stay for breakfast. I have a chef who makes pancakes that will change your life, and I want to discuss a business proposition." Vivian pulled back to look at him. "What kind of business proposition? The kind that involves research, revenge, and possibly ruining your ex-fiancé's life completely?" Alaric's smile was wicked. "Unless you're satisfied with just humiliating him publicly." She should have said yes. Should have taken her revenge and moved on like a mature adult. Instead, she heard herself ask, "How ruined are we talking?" An hour later, Vivian sat in Alaric's dining room in one of his shirts, eating pancakes that were indeed life-changing, while he laid out his plan. "Julian's family compound is failing," Alaric explained, pulling up financial documents on his tablet. "They're overextended, under-leveraged, and hemorrhaging money. The only thing keeping them afloat is their reputation, which after last night's scandal is significantly damaged." "How do you have their financial records?" Vivian asked, though she knew the answer. "I have people who acquire information." He slid the tablet across to her. "The compound is worth about 12 million on paper. In reality, it's worth half that. The land is good, but they've mismanaged it for decades. Outdated training methods, mediocre instructors, declining enrollment." Vivian studied the numbers, her academic brain automatically cataloging the problems. They could turn it around with the right investment, better training programs, modern equipment, competent leadership. "Exactly." Alaric's smile was pure predator. "Which is why I'm going to buy it through a shell company, untraceable to me. I'll offer them just enough to get out from under their debt, but not enough to start over anywhere respectable." And then what? But Vivian was starting to understand, starting to see the beautiful cruelty of it. "Then I hire you to run it. You transform it into a research institute focused on ethical vampire-human relations. We develop training programs that actually work, that teach understanding instead of just violence. We produce research that wins international recognition, that makes Julian's mediocre hunter training look like amateur hour." Alaric leaned forward, intent. "We take everything he was supposed to have, his family legacy, and we make it better. We make it legendary." It was vindictive and petty, and absolutely brilliant. Vivian should have said no, should have walked away from this dangerous vampire and his dangerous plans. "What's in it for you?" she asked instead. "Besides watching me destroy my ex?" Alaric shrugged. "A legitimate business to channel resources through, a research institute that actually produces knowledge worth protecting. And you, working for me, tied to me in a way that makes it very clear you've chosen me over him." "That's insane." "You keep saying that word." He reached across the table, caught her hand. "Yeah, but you're saying no." Vivian stared at their joined hands, at the contrast between her warm fingers and his cold ones. This was everything she'd been taught to avoid. Getting involved with a vampire lord, mixing business with revenge, letting attraction override common sense. But Julian had been feeding from her research partner for 6 months, had planned to marry her while creating an intimate bond with Serafina behind her back. And Serafina had smiled about it, had laughed while twisting the knife. "I want control of all research decisions," Vivian said. "Complete autonomy on curriculum, training methods, and publications. Done. And my name on the institute, not yours, not some shell company. Mine." Alaric's smile went sharp with approval. "I wouldn't have it any other way. I want everyone to know that Dr. Vivian Croft chose to work with me, that she's mine." "I'm not yours," Vivian protested, but her hand was still in his, and they both knew she was lying. "Not yet," he agreed. "But you will be." The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind. Alaric moved on the compound with the efficiency of a hostile takeover, making an offer Julian's family couldn't refuse and couldn't trace. The sale went through before they could mount a defense. And suddenly, Vivian owned, on paper at least, the Harper family legacy. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Julian called 17 times before Vivian blocked him. Serafina sent increasingly unhinged texts about betrayal and ethics, which was rich coming from the woman who'd been feeding from her colleague's fiancé. Their colleagues were torn between fascination and horror. Vivian barely noticed. She was too busy working with Alaric's team to modernize the compound, hiring new instructors, developing new curriculum. Alaric had resources she couldn't have dreamed of. Contacts in vampire courts across the world who owed him favors. Within 2 weeks, they had guest lecturers from the European Council, artifacts on loan from private collections, and funding that simply wasn't available through legitimate channels. "I don't want to know where you got this," Vivian said, examining a feeding chalice that was supposed to be in a museum in Prague. "Probably not," Alaric agreed. He was watching her work with the same intensity he'd watched her examine artifacts that first night. "You're incredible when you're focused like this. I can see why you won all those academic awards." They spent every night together, either at his penthouse or at the compound, blending business with pleasure in ways that would have horrified her 6 months ago. Alaric was demanding and dangerous, and exactly what she hadn't known she needed. He challenged her, supported her, and never once made her feel like she was second to anything. "This is unhealthy," her best friend Sarah warned over coffee. "You're rebounding with a vampire lord, Viv. This can't end well." "Probably not," Vivian agreed, stirring her latte. "But I've never felt more alive. Julian made me feel small, like my passion for research was an obsession that took away from us. Alaric makes me feel powerful." "Alaric makes you feel desired," Sarah corrected gently. "There's a difference." But was there? Vivian thought about the way Alaric looked at her when she lectured about feeding ethics. The pride in his eyes when she negotiated with council representatives. He desired her, yes, but he also respected her in a way Julian never had. The grand opening of the institute was scheduled for October, a symposium that would introduce Vivian's new curriculum to the world. Invitations went to every major player in vampire-human relations, every scholar who'd ever written about ethical feeding practices. Julian and Serafina were conspicuously not invited. The day before the symposium, Vivian stood in the renovated lecture hall, watching workers hang banners and arrange seating. The space looked nothing like it had under Julian's family. It looked modern and professional, ready to produce research that would make history. Nervous, Alaric appeared beside her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "Terrified," Vivian admitted, taking a glass. "What if it's not good enough? What if I've destroyed the Harper legacy instead of saving it?" "You've created something new," Alaric said gently. "Something better. The Harper legacy was mediocre vampire hunters and outdated prejudices. You're building a future where humans and vampires actually understand each other." "It's going to be perfect," Alaric said, reading her expression. "Just like you." "I'm not perfect," Vivian protested. "I'm vindictive and petty, and I'm sleeping with a vampire lord to get revenge on my ex. And you're sleeping with me because you want to," Alaric corrected with a smile. "The revenge is just a bonus." He set down his glass and pulled her close. "I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his tone made her heart skip. "What?" The council is investigating me. They've been building a case for months, and they're getting close. How close? Vivian's stomach dropped. She'd known this was coming, had known from the moment she'd looked him up that Lord Alaric Volkov lived on borrowed time. But knowing abstractly and hearing it out loud were different things. Close enough that my advisors are nervous. Close enough that I need to start distancing my legitimate businesses from my less legitimate ones. Alaric's hands were steady on her waist, his voice calm. Which means the Institute needs to be entirely yours. No shell companies, no hidden ownership, just you. They'll know, Vivian said immediately. They'll know you're behind it, that I'm connected to you. It won't protect either of us. It will protect you, he corrected. And if I go down, and I might, you'll have plausible deniability. An institute you legitimately own, bought with money that was cleanly processed before it reached you. The council can suspect all they want, but they won't be able to prove you knew where the funding came from. Vivian pulled back to look at him. You planned this from the beginning. The institute wasn't just about revenge or research. It was about setting me up with something legitimate before everything falls apart. Yes. No apology, no shame. I told you that first night. You have excellent taste in research. You deserve an institute that matches your talent, whether I'm around to enjoy it with you or not. You're talking like you're going to vampire prison. I'm talking like a vampire who understands probability. Alaric cupped her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. I've been doing this for 8 centuries, Vivian. I've gotten away with things that should have brought the council down on me lifetimes ago. The odds were always going to catch up eventually. She should have been angry. Should have felt used, manipulated, set up. Instead, all she felt was a fierce, unexpected protectiveness. This dangerous vampire had given her an institute, had helped her rebuild her career, had looked at her like she was the rarest artifact in existence. What if I don't want plausible deniability? Vivian asked. What if I want to fight for you? Then you'd be an idiot, Alaric said. But his voice was rough with emotion. And you're the smartest woman I know. Promise me, if this goes bad, you'll let me go. You'll take the institute and you'll make something beautiful. And you'll forget about the vampire lord who helped you get revenge. I can't promise that. Vivian. No. She kissed him, hard and desperate. You don't get to give me everything I didn't know I wanted and then ask me to forget you. That's not how this works. That's exactly how this has to work, Alaric said against her mouth. But he was kissing her back, his hands tangling in her hair. I'm not a good vampire. I've done things that would horrify you. I don't get the happy ending with the brilliant ethicist. Maybe I don't want a good vampire, Vivian shot back. Maybe I want the vampire who understands why ethical feeding matters, who helped me destroy my ex-fiancé, who looks at me like I'm worth more than all the stolen artifacts in his collection. They made love in the lecture hall, desperate and intense, surrounded by research that would outlast whatever happened next. Afterward, lying on the floor with Alaric's jacket as a pillow, Vivian made a decision. I'm not letting you go, she said quietly. If the council comes, I'll testify for you. If you need an alibi, I'll provide one. If they lock you away, I'll visit every week with research papers you're not supposed to see. Alaric laughed, pained and genuine. You're insane. You keep saying that, Vivian echoed his words from weeks ago. But I'm not changing my mind. The symposium was a triumph. Scholars raved about the transformation of the Institute, about Vivian's vision and expertise. Partnerships were formed with vampire courts across 3 continents. By sunset, Vivian had secured funding for the next 5 years and invitations to present at councils in London, Paris, and Tokyo. Julian showed up anyway, drunk and belligerent, dragging Serafina behind him. Security stopped them at the gate, but not before Julian started shouting about theft and manipulation and illegal dealings. Everything was done legally, Vivian said coldly, walking out to confront them with Alaric at her back. Your family sold the compound to a legitimate buyer. The fact that I'm running it now is simply good business. You're sleeping with him, Serafina spat, glaring at Alaric. Everyone knows you threw away your career, your reputation, your integrity for a vampire lord. I threw away a cheating fiancé and a backstabbing research partner, Vivian corrected. And I gained an institute, a career I actually control, and a vampire who respects me. I'd say I came out ahead. He's using you, Julian slurred. He's using you to legitimize his operations, to clean his reputation. You're just another asset to him. Vivian felt Alaric tense behind her, felt his anger like a physical thing. But she didn't need him to defend her. Not this time. And even if that were true, she said, I'd rather be a valued asset to Alaric than a trophy fiancé to you. At least he's honest about what he wants from me. She turned her back on them, on the life she'd almost had, and walked back to the symposium with Alaric's hand in hers. Behind them, security escorted Julian and Serafina off the property. She didn't look back. You handled that well, Alaric murmured as they rejoined the reception. I learned from the best, Vivian replied, squeezing his hand. Now come on. The council representative from Vienna wants to discuss our feeding ethics curriculum, and I need you to charm her while I discuss research methodology. Using me for my charm. I'm wounded. You'll survive. They worked the crowd together. Vivian discussing research with the passion that had made her a leading ethicist. Alaric providing the dark, dangerous edge that made everything more exciting. They were a team, she realized. A probably doomed team, but a team nonetheless. As the sun set over the institute, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Vivian stood with Alaric on the terrace, watching their guests toast with wine that bore her name on the institute's seal. Thank you, she said quietly, for all of this, for believing I could do it. I never doubted you for a second, Alaric replied. You're extraordinary, Dr. Vivian Croft. With or without me, you were always going to be extraordinary. 2 weeks later, the council raided Alaric's gallery. They seized documents, everything. The news broke on a Tuesday morning while Vivian was meeting with scholars in London. Her phone exploded with messages, news alerts, calls from her mother. She ignored all of it and flew straight back to New York, straight to Alaric's penthouse. He was there, surprisingly calm, watching the news coverage with a glass of blood wine. I told you to stay away, he said when she walked in. This is exactly what we talked about. And I told you I wasn't going anywhere. Vivian took the glass from his hand, drank half of it. What do you need? A time machine. Alaric's smile was bitter. They have enough to charge me. My lawyers say they'll offer a deal. 20 years in the shadow tombs if I cooperate. Testimony against my associates. Will you take it? No. He pulled her into his lap, buried his face in her hair. I won't put targets on other people's backs. Even criminals have a code. Vivian's hands shook as she held him. 20 years. 2 decades of her life without this dangerous, complicated vampire who'd somehow become essential. Then we fight, she said fiercely. And we get the best defense team money can buy. We find every loophole, every technicality. We make them work for every single charge. Vivian, no. She pulled back to look at him. You gave me an institute. You helped me rebuild my entire life. You think I'm just going to let you go quietly? You don't know me at all if you think that. Alaric kissed her, deep and desperate. I love you, he said against her mouth. I wasn't supposed to, but I do. You're the best thing that's happened to me in 8 centuries, and I'm about to ruin your life. You love me. Vivian's heart was racing. They'd never said it before, had danced around it for weeks, but hearing it now, with everything falling apart, felt both perfect and tragic. Desperately, Alaric confirmed. Which is why you need to walk away before you're photographed here, before anyone can connect you to this more than they already have. I love you too, Vivian said, because if he could be brave enough to say it, so could she. And I'm not walking away. So you can either accept that I'm staying and let me help, or you can waste time arguing while the council builds their case. He stared at her for a long moment. This brilliant, infuriating woman who'd crashed into his life with a drunken request for a bite and somehow become everything. Then he laughed, helpless and genuine. You're going to be the death of me. Probably, Vivian agreed. But not today. Today we call your lawyers and we start fighting back. And as the sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows across the penthouse filled with stolen art and forbidden knowledge. Dr. Vivian Croft and Lord Alaric Volkov began planning their defense. She'd touched the vampire lord and lived to tell the tale. Better than that, she'd fallen in love with him, reformed him, and built an empire with him. The best revenge, as it turned out, wasn't just living well. It was living dangerously, passionately, and abundantly in love. Even if the council was coming, even if the future was uncertain, even if the whole world thought she was insane. Because sometimes the worst nights of your life lead to the best decisions. And sometimes, the most dangerous choice is the one worth making.